Welcome to another episode of Geekoutdoors.com. And on this episode, I want to talk about somebody that you've probably heard of, and that's Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable tech company in the world. And recently, the latest Steve Jobs movie just came out that stars Fasenberg. It's got a script written by Aaron Sorkin, and it's also directed by Danny Boyle. And it's got rave reviews, much better than the previous movie by Ashton Kutcher, which was Jobs. And out of those two, which one is my favorite? Which one did I think is the best? Well, neither of them. My favorite Steve Jobs movie is actually a movie that came out more than almost 20 years ago, actually, almost. And that is Pirates of Silicon Valley. And for anyone who've never heard of this, this is, to me, probably one of the best tellings of Steve Jobs, but not just Steve Jobs, but it has Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and the story of how Bill Gates and Paul Allen, and also Steve Ballmer, how they founded Microsoft. So it's actually two stories. It's a story of the rise of Microsoft and Apple, and also the whole technology revolution. Because in Apple, they revolutionized PC computing. They were actually the first company to create a personal computer that you could actually go and buy. Because before then, the only way you would have a computer is there would be these mainframes and big box computers. The PC industry didn't exist prior to Apple. And Microsoft really created the first commercially viable operating system. It started with MS-DOS, and then it is what it is today. And so why do I enjoy this movie so much? Why do I like it so much? Well, let me give you a little background of what this movie is about. And so this movie is actually based upon a book called Fire in the Valley. And the valley means the Silicon Valley. And it actually talks about how these two companies were formed and the people who were involved in it. So this timeline when these actually starts around the same time, 1970 and 1971. And the whole movie starts off with the very iconic Apple commercial in 1984. If you're not familiar with what that commercial is, you could look that up on YouTube. And what it is there's this girl, she's running in there, she has a hammer, and you see this big screen, and it's just talking to all these, basically, people who are like drones and zombies, just listening to this guy talk. And the guy on the screen is supposed to represent Big Brother. And Big Brother of the tech industry at the time was IBM. And so the girl throws the hammer and just smashes that screen. And that was one of probably the most iconic commercial in tech, or even just in history. And that was an Apple commercial, actually. And that was actually directed by legendary director Ridley Scott. Now, that type of opening, it sets it up for the whole movie. And then it goes on and it focuses on Bill Gates and Paul Allen when they were at Harvard University. And then it shows you kind of like why they quit Harvard, why they dropped out of Harvard. Bill Gates and Harvard were like childhood friends, and they were always interested in tech. They were both geeks, very technical guys, and they were interested in this machine. It was called the MITS Altair, if I'm not mistaken, and they wanted to develop OS or programming language for it. And the machine was, the company was actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So they dropped out of Harvard to pursue that. And that pretty much starts off Microsoft's creation. And then around the same time, we switch over to Steve Jobs' parents' garage, where him and Steve Wozniak were building the prototype for the very first Apple computer. And actually, it was mostly Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak's, he's always been known as the technical person. He's always been known as the true geek. He actually developed it. Steve Jobs was always known, and will probably always be known as the visionary, as the marketer. That's what he was known for. And that's so cool, because when it shows him how the machine was being built, it shows how the investor comes and they help launch Apple. But that's the beginning of Apple. Now, what I like about this movie a lot is it takes a lot of history from both, and it puts it in a way that makes sense, and that is really, really enjoyable. And the movies are actually narrated by the co-founders. Well, for Apple, it's narrated by the actor who played Steve Wozniak, And then for Microsoft, it's actually played by the actor who played Steve Ballmer. So Paul Allen's actually not narrating it. And Paul Allen, in real life, he's pretty reclusive. So you won't see a lot of him giving a lot of speeches or interviews anyway. So that takes a different spins. And one thing I really want to talk about are the main actors of this movie. Noah Wyle, who plays Steve Jobs, and Anthony Michael Hall, who plays Bill Gates. Bar none, I think they are the best actors to have ever portrayed these two guys, these two legendary men. And not only do they look like them, but they got their mannerisms down, and it was just an amazing thing. And there are so many wonderful scenes in this movie, but you know, spoilers, I'm going to give away a few that I really enjoyed. One of the really exciting scenes, at least to me, was when they were at a homebrew convention. And this convention at the time, this was for all like the hackers, the programmers at the time. And you know, this was brand new. And that was, if I remember correctly, that was like the first meeting between Steve Jobs and Wozniak and Bill Gates and Paul Allen. And I think Steve Ballmer was in that scene as well. And so that was really cool. And eventually, Bill Gates and his team would actually do go work for Apple for a short term. And also another point in the movie was when Bill Gates and his his team, Paul Allen and Steve Ballmer, went to IBM, and they sold them their very first operating system, MS-DOS, and they didn't even have an operating system at the time. And it wasn't until they bought it from I think it was Tim Patterson, and it was a Seattle company. They bought MS-DOS, which would become MS-DOS. I'm sorry, it was called I can't remember. It was originally CMD, but then it was named something else. Tim Patterson took that and made it something else. Anyway, that became MS-DOS, which later became Microsoft. And then for the scene with Apple, my favorite scene was that scene when Steve Jobs accused Bill Gates of stealing their software, which was awesome. That was probably one of the most tense, most exciting scenes I've seen in a tech movie, and it was done so well. And also another wonderful scene was when Apple went to Xerox PARC, and that's where they got the idea to produce the very first GUI interface for an operating system, which would be in the Apple Lisa machine. So those are just some of the scenes. And also the final scene, pretty much where Bill Gates is on a big screen at one of the Mac Expo, and he's looking down on Steve Jobs. Bill Gates is now Big Brother. So awesome movie. I can't say enough about this movie. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. And the thing that I enjoy most about it, besides the wonderful way and that the story was told, very complex stories. The way they even talk about Steve Jobs and his relationships with his daughter Lisa, and his battles with Christine Brennan. And so they were able to weave all of that in there. But the thing that I enjoyed most about this movie was that it was fun. This is a movie that, especially if you're really into tech, you could enjoy over and over. It was just a really fun movie. There were some serious moments, but overall, it was just a great movie. And so if you're interested in Steve Jobs or just tech in general, be sure to check out Pirates of Silicon Valley. You won't regret it. And so leave me your thoughts, your comments on what you thought about this movie, or what is your favorite tech movie. And if you do like these videos, be sure to subscribe. And if you want to see the whole written episode, check out Geekoutdoors.com, and we'll see you on another episode.